Plato was perhaps one of the great mental giants of the world in philosophy. I'm sure all of us have heard the name Plato, but really it was a nickname. Plato had very broad shoulders, and Plato meant broad-shouldered. Well, Plato wrote one of the great classic works in philosophy called the Republic. And in the seventh book of the Republic, he begins it with the famous allegory of the cave. Plato pictured the whole world as a cave, and in the cave everyone lived, and everyone was chained in such a way that their back was to the opening of the cave. They could not see the light pouring in the opening. Their faces were toward the wall of the cave and the rocks, and that's all they could see. And they saw on these walls and rocks of the cave shadows from the outside world. But because they were chained in such a way, they could not look toward the opening of the cave, and all they saw were the shadows. And because they saw these shadows from their childhood on, they began to believe that the only realities in life were the shadows. And one day, a prisoner broke the chains that bound him, and he turned toward the opening of the cave, toward the light. And he walked out of the cave, and then he saw a real world. And he began to realize that the shadows on the walls of the cave were only reflections of the greater realities outside of the cave, that they were only illusions and delusions. And then he remembered the people dwelling in the cave, his friends. And so he went back into the cave, and he told them that the real world was outside of the cave, that these shadows were only reflections of the real realities in the outside world. Some of them believed him, and others did not believe him. And those who did not believe him murdered him. Plato wanted to teach by that allegory that there is a greater world than the sensate world, the world of the senses, that there is the world of ideas, and that the model for all ideas existed in a reality outside of the world. And he called this reality agathon, the good. It's the closest Plato got to God. And his mentor and his teacher, Socrates, had arrived at the same conclusion of a reality beyond this world. And because Socrates debunked the myths of Grecian mythology, he was murdered. He had to drink the hemlock. Well, I think Plato's allegory can teach us a Christian lesson. The world in which we live is like a cave. And in this world, all of us are blind, because all we can really see in this world are shadows, shadows of a greater reality beyond this cave world. One day, into this cave world came a great light, the light of the world, Jesus Christ. And he told men in this cave world that what they accounted as reality are only shadows, shadows of a greater world beyond this world. We have not here a lasting city. We look for one that is to come. But this cave world is filled with blind men. And there are two kinds of blind men. First, there are men and women who are physically blind, like the blind man in the Gospel of St. John. St. John tells us that as Jesus walked along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. And this man could not see the light of day. And secondly, there are men who are blinder than the blind man of the Gospel of John. They're like the Pharisees who questioned the blind man when he recovered his sight, and who rejected the miracles of Jesus. The Pharisees could see the light of day, but they could not see the light of truth. Having eyes, they saw not. Undoubtedly, God has permitted physical blindness in our world to warn us against a far more terrible blindness, spiritual blindness, against the light of truth. St. Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, speaks about spiritual darkness and spiritual light. Listen to his words. He was writing to the Ephesians, and he said to them, "There was a time when you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Well then, live as children of light. Light produces every kind of goodness and justice and truth. Be correct in your judgment of what pleases the Lord. Take no part in vain deeds done in darkness. Rather condemn them. It is shameful even to mention the things these people do in secret. But when such deeds are condemned, they are seen in the light of day, and all that then appears is light. That is why we read, 'Awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light.'" Who are the spiritually blind? Those who walk in darkness, about whom St. Paul speaks. They are those who cling to the shadows, to the things and the pleasures of this world, as though they were the ultimate reality. How sad it is that so many of the rock stars of the 60s and early 70s today are dead, and not one of them, or very few of them, ever reached the age of 40. Not too long ago, after downing 40 shots of vodka in 12 hours, John Bonham, the wild, reckless, madcap drummer for the Led Zeppelins, choked to death on his own vomit in Windsor, England. In 1968, he was the co-founder of the fabulously successful British band. Bonham was only 32 years old. He had a wife, Pat, and 2 children, Jason and Zoe, a 100-acre farm, a garage full of luxury cars, and for the past 5 years, an annual income of at least $5 million. He enjoyed everything money could buy, yet he drank himself to death, adding his name to the following list of rock and roll casualties. Brian Jones, Rolling Stone guitarist, drowned in 1969 at the age of 26 while under the influence of liquor and drugs. Janis Joplin, singer, died in 1970 at the age of 27 of heroin overdose. Jimi Hendrix, guitarist-singer, died in 1970 at the age of 27 after an overdose of sleeping pills. Jim Morrison, singer, leader of The Doors, died in 1971 at the age of 27 of an apparent heart attack caused by heavy drinking. Elvis Presley, singer, died in 1977 at the age of 42, ostensibly of heart attack, but addicted to wide variety of drugs. Keith Moon, drummer of The Who, died in 1978 at age 32 from an overdose of drugs. Sid Vicious, guitarist for the Sex Pistols, died in 1979 at the age of 21 from an overdose of heroin. Malcolm Owen, singer with the Ruts, died at the age of 24 in 1980 of an overdose of heroin? What drove these young musicians to drink, drugs, and death? It was the shadows that they were chasing. They were confusing the illusions of life for the realities. They lived as if there were no reality beyond this world. Those who do this, as Paul says, do deeds in darkness, which it is even shameful to mention. Go to Paul's epistle to the Romans and the very first chapter, and he tells us there what the men and women of pagan Rome did in their days, because they looked upon the shadows of this world as ultimate realities. Paul says this. He said, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against the irreligious and perverse, who in their perversity of spirit hinders the truth. And God has abandoned them to unclean practices, in the consequence of which, he said, their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, as lesbianism. Men gave up natural intercourse with women and burned with lust for one another. Homosexuality. Deeds, shameful things, he said, that it is not even fitting to mention in the light. And who are the unblind? Those who live as the children of light, according to Paul. And he said, they are those who produce every kind of goodness and justice and truth. The children of light produce goodness. That is, they are kind and generous in their dealings with others. Justice, because they are fair in their dealings with others, especially in the relationship of marriage. The only thing I can see that Women's Lib has done for women is to liberate men. I have seen men, husbands, after 5, 10, 15 years of marriage, walking out of their homes and leaving their wives and children for another woman, completely abandoning them. What a sin against justice! What a terrible thing in the eyes of God. Children of the darkness, confusing shadows with reality. And the children of the light walk not only in goodness and justice, but also in truth. They are sincere and honest, and avoid all hypocrisy and falsehood. In the selection of Israel's greatest king, David, God sent the prophet Samuel, the last of the judges, to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, to pick a king to succeed the disobedient Saul. And when Samuel saw Eliab, the oldest son of Jesse, he said, surely this is a man of regal bearing. He is fit to be king of Israel. But then the Lord said no. He vetoed that choice. And Samuel then selected the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh child. And each one God vetoed. And he told Samuel this: man sees the appearances, but God looks into the heart. He said, judge not by appearances. And so Samuel asked Jesse if there was another child of his. And he said yes. And they brought in David from the hillsides, who was watching his sheep, and God said, he is the man, David. Let us pray to God that we may be children of the light, that with X-ray eyes we may pierce beneath the shadows of this earth and see to the reality beyond it, and live for the world beyond this cave. God bless you in every way, every day.